Says it's his prostate and it needs to be operated on. Is that going to be covered?
Not unless Dr. Robinson authorizes.
What good is that going to do?
I'm sorry, there's nothing else I can do.
All right, well, you know what I can't do? I can't look at you without thinking about the 5 or 6 more qualified white men who didn't get your job.
It's time for you to go.
Now, I'm saying this because I'm really hoping that I'm wrong about you. I'm hoping that someone like yourself, someone who may have been given a helping hand, might have a little compassion for someone in a similar situation.
Carol, I need security in my office.
You know, you don't like me, that's fine. I'm a prick. My father doesn't deserve to suffer like this. He was a janitor. He struggled his whole life, saved enough to start his own company. 23 employees, all of them black, paid him equal wages when no one else was doing that. For 30 years, he worked side by side with those men, sweeping and carrying garbage. And then the city council decides to give minority-owned companies preference in city contracts. And overnight, my father loses everything. His business, his home, his wife, everything. But not once does he blame you people. Now, I'm not asking you to help me. I'm asking that you do this small thing for a man who lost everything so people like yourself could reap the benefits. And do you know what it's going to cost you? Nothing. Just a flick of your pen.
Your father sounds like a good man. And if he'd come in here today, I probably would have approved this request. But he didn't come in. You did. And for his sake, it's a real shame. Get him the hell out of my office.
The Cows. Justice Gus T Renegade in for another program, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of racism. Today's date, Monday, November 12th, 2012. So I have been told. We will be back on Wednesday, November 14th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll give out more details before we conclude with today's broadcast. The sound clip at the beginning from the film Crash. Lots of interesting tidbits in the movie. I thought that particular scene would translate nicely for the conversation we're supposed to be having today. Been really excited about the opportunity to discuss some of our guests' work. I first started seeing some of his research studies towards the end of this summer, and I was trying to get him as a guest on the program then. But it took some time just trying to work out a date and all that would work out for everyone's schedule. And just no coincidences. We ended up doing the program a little bit later, and I think that will make it even more interesting given what's happened with the election and how many people have responded. Should be great dialogue. Our guest for today's program is director of the Diversity and Intergroup Relations Lab. He is also associate professor of psychology at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. He is an experimental social psychologist. His interests, issues related to stereotyping, prejudice, and group diversity. He focuses on 2 general and often overlapping topics. Number 1, race and social perception, judgment and interaction. Number 2, the intersection of psychology and law. In addition, he's also written a book which is called Situations Matter. I chuckled and laughed and laughed. I didn't even know about, he did a TED Talk that is called The Hidden Power of Context. I laughed and laughed and laughed. I am also looking forward to hearing his thoughts on that, and throwing in just cherry on top. His wife would insist on mentioning that he was voted by the student newspaper as the hottest male professor on campus. You can get more tidbits about his book. You can see photographs to see if that's true, as well as his other research interests. You can check his website, www.dr www.samsommers.com. Again, it is www.samsommers.com. Joining us live, our guest, Dr. Sam Sommers. Dr. Sommers, are you with us?
I am indeed.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your afternoon with us. Really looking forward to discussing some of your work. For listeners, this might have been their first time hearing about your work, hearing from you. Any background information that you would like to share with our audience before we proceed?
Well, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I'm a research psychologist, a social scientist, and so I'm interested in questions, as you mentioned, surrounding how race influences the way we see each other, interact with each other, communicate with each other, and so forth. And I study those issues as they play out in day-to-day conversation and interaction, but also as they relate to real-world domains like the legal system and jury decision-making and other real-world contemporary current events that we might be talking about in the news today. So, happy to be here and happy to have a conversation about sort of the social science perspective on all these issues.
Right on. You are a white man?
I am indeed a white man.
Okay. This program, this is going to be so funny. The name of this program is The Context of White Supremacy.
Okay.
I have concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that such a system exists, and do you believe that's an accurate definition?
Well, the second part of your question is an accurate definition, right? That's something that, we as social scientists wrestle with here. So what one person might refer to as a system of white supremacy, and another might refer to as sort of institutionalized racism, and another might refer to as sort of systemic racial bias. There are semantic and important differences between those kinds of concepts, but the general proposition that you suggest there, that there are, I guess I would break it down as follows. I certainly subscribe, and the research I think supports the conclusion that issues related to race and racial group membership is something that all of us notice and all of us are influenced by on a regular basis. I think there are also very clear examples of institutionalized racial bias that are endemic to a variety of different systems that we might talk about. And I think there's some variability. I do think you have people who fit that description that you gave, who are motivated to maintain the racial status quo in society and in a variety of institutions. And I also think you have a fair number of individuals in our society who would tell you that they're motivated to do the right thing, and would tell you that they don't have, quote unquote, a biased bone or a racist bone in their bodies, and who genuinely believe that to be the case, but who nonetheless are, and particularly under some circumstances more than others, but who nonetheless are influenced by race in the way that they see each other, interact with each other, and so forth, because frankly all of us are in some capacity. So I think it's hard to paint with a broad brush, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing that either. So I think that becomes the question. You have folks, I think, that would fit the description you gave. You also have, I think, a good deal of Americans who, again, want to believe and genuinely do believe they're fair-minded and are trying to do the right thing in different contexts, but aren't always able to do that and don't always live up to that ideal they might be espousing.
I pay I attempt to pay close attention to words. That word fair was used 3 times. Significant. Yeah. One thing I want to touch, just I think it's very important when people begin to talk about racism and race issues. I think it's very important to just be as clear and explicit as possible about power dynamic, an unequal power dynamic between white people and non-white people, that white people are wielding a lot more power. And I'm not just talking about the United States, globally. That's what I mean when I say global system, where white people have a lot more power over non-white people in all areas of people activity. And that's one thing that I think is paramount to keep in context and to be mindful of anytime there's a discussion of race. Do you think that's accurate?
I do think that's accurate. I think you see that across cultures. I think you see that across history. I do think that that's an accurate statement, and it's something that I think when you have these conversations with some white Americans, it's something that can be a challenge, because I think there's this notion that, well, you know, if I'm going to be influenced by, if I make a judgment and it's influenced by race, or if I say something and it's racially charged, isn't it the same thing if somebody else of a different racial background says something along those lines, and to recognize that it's not necessarily the same thing, that they're not necessarily equal, and that people can say things about their own groups that don't come off the same way when they're said about other groups. The lack of symmetry to those kinds of interactions, I think, is something that does get lost in some of the conversations folks have on these issues.
Okay. Again, this program, Context of White Supremacy, I had been downloading some of your articles, and I had gone to your website. We had been emailing for a while trying to set up a date for the program, and I was totally unaware that you had done this TED Talk titled The Hidden Power of Context. And as I was telling listeners, I was just cracking up laughing. And I said, wow, this should give our listeners great insight on why the program is titled as it is, as well as why I harp on the importance of context all the time. Your book, Situations Matter. I'm just reading from your website. You say, the world around you is pulling your strings, shaping your private thoughts and innermost instincts, and you don't even realize it. Why is context so important?
Well, it turns out when you look at what the scientific evidence tells us, human nature is surprisingly context dependent. We're surprisingly shaped by the situations in which we find ourselves. I think we spend a lot of our time ignoring that or overlooking that fact. So you have people, you see an individual behave in a certain way, and you think, well, it's because they're that type of person. We come up with this internal, intrinsic personality or character-based conclusion about the individual. And that helps simplify the world around us and make things in an unpredictable universe a little bit more predictable. But human nature is a lot more complicated than that. The same person who might sit idly by and not get involved in a big crowd when someone's in need of assistance or a potential emergency is going on might, leap to the forefront and behave in a way we see as heroic under different circumstances. And so I think that the circumstances in which we find ourselves, the context in which we find ourselves, change how we see the world, how we think, how we act, and who we are as people. And we don't always realize that. And it also, to tie it back in, it certainly plays a role in issues related to race and racial bias and racism and so forth. And I think that that's something, and we can talk more about what I mean by this if you want, but I think that that's something that people overlook as well when it comes to race.
Yes. Could we get more details on how racism how the racism influenced the context in which we live?
Well, I mean, here's a point that I raise in the book and something that I've been writing and thinking about more often recently. I think one of the problems that we have in society when we want to have conversations about race or about racial bias, another problem is that we've evolved to this point where a substantial number of Americans, particularly white Americans, think that any conversation at all about race is a problem and means you're, quote-unquote, playing the race card or doing something inappropriate or taking us down a road that people don't want to go down. And there's this sort of disingenuous notion of, well, I'm just colorblind and I don't see race, so why are we even talking about it? So that's certainly one issue. But I think another problem that we have is that too many of our conversations about race and racial bias focus again on internal personality variables. Right? I mean, about who is and who is not a quote-unquote racist, which is a very, when you think about it, a very dispositional, personality-based term. I mean, let's take the Trayvon Martin incident, the shooting, right? The tragic death of Trayvon Martin. There's when this story finally gets more mainstream, widespread attention from the media, we're subjected to like a week's worth of pointless conversations about whether or not George Zimmerman, the shooter, is a quote-unquote racist. And so we're having conversations about well, what word did he use? This given word on the 911 tape? Has he worked before? His family saying, well, he worked in helped tutor at-risk kids, and he has black friends, and we're having these crazy conversations about those aspects of his background as if any of that really matters in terms of what happened on the night in question with the shooting. There's this, anytime we have one of these Michael Richards at the nightclub or Mel Gibson being pulled over and spewing racist and anti-Semitic language, there's this conversation of, is this person a racist or not? And that's a tough conversation to ever get resolution on, because almost no one in today's society would ever admit that they are a racist. And so if we focus instead on questions about just systemic racial bias, the fact that I, as a white man in my 30s, if I'm going at night to buy stuff at the convenience store, even with a hooded sweatshirt on, no one sees me as suspicious, and have the conversations about those circumstances and the sort of endemic bias that's in all of those interactions, and then what we can do to strategize to prevent that and reduce that. That, at some level, is a more useful conversation than, is that guy a racist, is that guy a racist? Because that conversation just sort of goes in circles, and we wind up having ridiculous discussion about who has black friends or not, and how many does it take to qualify as a non-racist, and that doesn't really get us anywhere.
Important point, very important point. The title of the program, although I do ask from time to time, because I have bumped into some white people who do openly admit that they are racist, and we ask for a definition of that, and they will admit that, but most of the time,
yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that there are not people who identify with that. There are, the stories about the people whose Twitter posts make that quite clear after Obama's reelection and so forth. And so there are, and the Kevin Dillon monologue from the movie you opened the segment with. I mean, there are folks who will admit readily they have biases, and here's what they are. At some level, that's easier to deal with because you know what you have in front of you, right? I think the bigger challenge in some respects are the folks who don't believe that and who again genuinely believe that they are non-biased individuals and yet still fall victim to some of these same patterns. But I agree with you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that is not the case most of the time, and I think that can be very confusing when you are in an environment that is saturated with racism, all areas of people activity and black people coming up short in all these different areas, and you can't understand why, because you have so many white people who are saying, well, no, of course I'm not racist, and I've got 28 black friends, and I go to black movies all the time, and would never dream of being racist, and wouldn't even talk to a racist. It can be very confusing, and I think to your point, I think once you begin to understand, at least my conclusion, once you understand the context of the world in which we live is saturated with racism. It influences the way you think, the way you behave. It influences more things that I can even name. I think once you begin to understand that, then you get a much clearer idea of why things like what happened with the Trayvon Martin incident, why you see the explosion on Twitter after President Obama's reelection, calling him a nigger and all this other stuff. I think you get a much better understanding of, okay, this is kind of the default setting for the world in which we live, racism, white supremacy, and mistreatment of black non-white people. I think that gives you a much better understanding of why these different things are happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. I think that, as you suggested, I think, and we know from the data that perhaps most white Americans would tell you, no, they're not racist, they're not racially biased. And they'll tell you, I think, we know from surveys too, that from data that white Americans will tell you that racism still exists, but everyone thinks not with me, and not in this case, and not in this instance. So sure, racial bias is still there, but not with this shooting, or not in this case, or not in this trial, or not in this employment decision. It's just that it's almost always not in this case. This idea that in the abstract I recognize it's there, but in the concrete here and now, no, I don't see it happening here, and that's sort of the mindset that I think you're banging up against in many respects in trying to talk about specific incidents.
Again, our guest, Dr. Sam Sommers. The first report of yours that I saw, going right to this, whites see racism as a zero-sum game that they are now losing. real interesting study. Listeners, if you're interested, it is online. You can check it out if you want to. Can you kind of give our listeners an idea of what this study is about?
Sure. So this is a survey, sort of a public opinion poll, and in the sample we have over 200 white Americans and over 200 African Americans responding to it. Not college students, general community members from the population at large. And what we did was we asked these individuals to talk about racism as it exists in society, and we asked them actually to take a decade-by-decade look at this and to say, okay, starting in the 1950s, how bad a problem was anti-black racism in America, give it a rating on this scale, and do the same thing for the 60s and the 70s, the 80s and 90s, and up to today. And, well, today was the 00 as the first decade of this millennium. This was where we sort of stopped with the study, and we asked them, again, to rate how big a problem anti-black racism is in America in those different eras. We then also asked them to do the same thing for racism or racial bias targeted against white Americans. And so we have all these respondents talking about racism over the decades, essentially. And you find there's some points of agreement that both white and black Americans talking about anti-black racism in America will tell you that they believe that that problem has declined over the decades, that it was greater in the 50s and 60s, and there's been a decline in that as a problem in our society since then. But there's a divergence in terms of how steeply the decline is believed to be. So white Americans, for example, see that decline has been much steeper and much sharper, and that we're in an era now where there's really not a big problem of that kind of racism, whereas African American respondents see there's been a decline over time, but that anti-black racism is still a problem. I think one of the most interesting findings is what happens when you look at their ratings for today, and again, today being the 00s, the double aughts there, the first decade of this century. And what you see is that for that decade, for the present day, among our respondents, the white respondents, your average white survey respondent said that in this day and age, they think bias against white people is just as big, if not a bigger problem, than bias against African Americans. And not surprisingly, probably African American respondents didn't see things that way. But this idea that, in this day and age, contrary to all the objective data out there with regard to things like access to health care and infant mortality and education and incarceration rates and income levels and so on down the line that would tell a very different story. Contrary to all of that, you're seeing your average white American think that racism or bias against white people just as big, even bigger problem than racism against black people in this day and age. And I think that in talking about the context in which these interactions we have in society operate, that's a pretty important one to think about, that you've got a lot of white people out there who think that they themselves are just as big, if not bigger, victims of racism than people of color in this day and age.
This is outstanding synopsis, Dr. Sommers. This is, in my view, an extremely important study, particularly given what just happened with the election. You're about to have affirmative action at the Supreme Court again.
Yeah.
This is going to be coming up big time. I suspect you're already seeing it. I suspect you're about to see huge waves of white people stepping forward and saying, I'm already seeing it. I'm just saying it's going to be increasing. White people saying, I'm a victim of racism. I'm tired of people attacking me because I'm a white person and saying bad things about me. Alex Jones has been ranting about this for about a month now on his radio program all throughout the election process. And what you just said, there is no evidence that white people are struggling to get jobs, that black people are not hiring white people. There's no evidence that they are being restricted from being able to do things and function at an optimal level, which is, to me, even more scary. But then I paused. Matter of fact, I'll read this sentence and get your thought. This is from your work. They perceive, you're talking about white people, perceived more anti-white bias than anti-black bias. By the 2000s, some 11% of whites gave anti-white bias the maximum rating on our scale, in comparison with only 2% of whites who did so for anti-black bias. That is astounding, in my opinion. Now, 11% is not half of the white people in your study, but that's significant that you had 11% who gave the maximum rating, saying that they feel like mistreatment of white people is happening at an astronomical level in this country. Do you have any explanation as to how they are feeling this way, why they're feeling this way?
Well, I do at some level, right? And what you suggest, I think what you suggested is true. I have not seen by any means any data that would suggest that there is this epidemic of white Americans being prejudiced against when it comes to the labor force, when it comes to unemployment, being hired by people and so forth. Now, I will say that what we do know is that Americans as a whole have been struggling in the last half-decade, the last decade. And now, again, the data make it clear that African American and Latino Americans struggling even more. The unemployment rate is even higher in those communities for the most part, right? But it is true, of course, that like most of America, many white Americans have been struggling when it comes to unemployment and so on and so forth. And economically speaking, it doesn't mean that they're right, that is somehow targeting them because of their race. But I think at some level we know, again, historically speaking, that when times are tough, when the economy starts to go sour, when folks are feeling those kinds of pressures in their lives, that prejudice gets increased, that intergroup competition, the perception that people of different groups are competing for scarce resources, that becomes heightened and increased. You see unemployment, and we're down under 8% now, but when you see unemployment close to 9 and close to 10%, in certain communities even higher, it takes a rational person to step back and say, hey, this is not good what's happening in this community. But you know what? It's even worse in the African American community on the other side of town. Most people don't do that. Most people see their own situation. They feel like things aren't going well, and they're looking for explanations and things to blame it on. This is not to justify or to say this is a good and rational or again a justifiable conclusion to draw. But I do think that that's the process that's caught up in this somewhat. I've gotten a bunch of emails since I've written my book, since the election, actually even more recently, from, in this case, a lot of white Americans saying they've read about my research and here's why they feel that they really are targeted and here's why they feel that, they can't get a job. And it's almost like there's the apocryphal or urban legend of, well, there's all these African Americans and Hispanic employees getting jobs that they can't get because of affirmative action. I mean, if that were the case, you'd expect really low unemployment rates in those populations, and that's not what's happening. But, when you can't get a job or your kid can't get a job or when your kid gets frustrated because he or she doesn't get into the college that you want, it's threatening and you look for explanations for it. And unfortunately, the way that human nature tends to manifest itself, often those explanations that we gravitate to are those involving other groups, other people. It's sort of the way we think, again, not to exonerate or justify it by any means, but I think that sheds some light on where this mindset is coming from.
Wow. I want to push back on one point. Like I said, I think this is fascinating. I hope folks out there listening, as a matter of fact, if you all want to call in, if you have questions, Dr. Sommers, he's going to be with us for another 30 minutes. So you should dial in quickly, get a hand up. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943 pound. Definitely do not wait till the end on this one. But just to the point that you raised about when the economy goes sour or when people on the whole are not doing well, we look for explanations, we look for an excuse. Someone has got to be to blame for this. One point that I did want to push back on in terms of it being human nature, this is one of those things that I think is exclusive to white people. And I say this for a couple reasons. When I was reading your study about in the 2000s, that the first decade where this increase in white people perceiving that they are victims of racism, that they are being mistreated, I was, intrigued by that. Like, wow, this is interesting. But then I stopped and said, well, wait a minute. This is not new. I have seen this before. In fact, this is kind of really, really stale in terms of white people having the myth that they are being attacked by some peril of non-white people. This is really, really old, even when there is no evidence that this threat exists. And I was thinking, if any group, black people in America should overstand this. Whole black towns have been burned down. The myth that a black person raped a white woman, even when many white people seem to know that I don't think anything happened, I don't think she was raped, but we're just going to go along with this and burn down this town and lynch some black people. This has happened over and over and over. And I don't see that sort of irrational, we're just going to make up a lie and blame these black people or blame these group of non-white people that they somehow are at fault, they are culpable for any problems that we as white people are facing, and we're going to respond on the basis of this irrational and untrue belief. I don't see that as a pattern of consistent behavior in groups of non-white people. Do you see that?
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, like you said, historically, whites have been empowered. They've been in positions of power. They've been the institution. They've been the law enforcement and the status quo. And so they've had the potential, the capacity to do what you've talked about here, to infiltrate the city and burn it down, to do that. I agree with your sentiment that this is something that you see a lot of in moving in that direction. I do think that, you know, I'm not sure that there's that much evidence that suggests at some level that our need to explain and rationalize away frustration and negative outcome, that is something that only manifests itself in this way for white people, for white men, in a way that it doesn't for non-white men. I think that, however, as you suggested, whites are traditionally in a position of power and in a position to have the implications of that tendency be really problematic in a way that they aren't usually moving in the other direction. I mean, I'm sure, and again, this gets us into controversial territory, but there's certainly, especially, anecdotally speaking, examples of false accusations of racism or what have you that come from a variety of people, a variety of different backgrounds. But I agree with you at a systemic level. Again, whites are in the position of power. They are the status quo, and historically, in most societies, and many societies have been. And so, I think you see the kind of pattern that you're referencing there.
I don't want to let white women off the hook either, because I think in your study you had more white women than white men, and you saw the same tendencies with white men and white women in your study. Is that true?
In terms of the data we were just talking about, right, they're not pronounced sex differences between white men and white women. I mean, we certainly know, again, if we're talking about systemic institutionalized biases, that, I mean, the data just came out not long ago, right, that the average, taking race out of the equation for a second, the average woman still making 78 cents on the dollars out of this for doing the same work that the average male worker does. And so there's clearly at a sex level, at a sexism level, still that's something we're wrestling with as a society as well. And then you put race and gender together, it becomes even more complicated. But no, your point is well taken.
I do see a couple folks with hands. I'll see if they have questions on this study. Mr. Reed, founder of the Black Talk Radio Network. Mr. Reed, your line should be open. Did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Renegade. I have a question for you, Mr. Sommers. My question for you, earlier you were speaking, you were talking about the perceptions of white people and what they believed and who they believed it was caused by. And so you can't, but getting straight to the point, don't you think some of this behavior, I would say the vast majority of this behavior is being programmed? When you take into consideration the things that Donald Trump has said, calling for a revolution, Limbaugh been saying for a number of years, Virginia Republicans calling for an armed revolution if Obama is elected, President Obama reelected. So I'm seeing a lot of this in mainstream, mostly propaganda, conservative channels. And so, I mean, how much do you think this programming is playing a role in white people's attitudes and their expressions of racism? And I'll hang up and take your answer. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think that it's a fair point, and I think that the rise of conservative or right-wing, if you want to call it, talk radio and cable news shows and punditry, et cetera, is certainly irrelevant to the discussion. I also think at some level I'm wary of letting the rest of America off the hook, because I think there are a lot of people out there who don't watch those channels and listen to those radio programs, and who don't self-identify as being on that side of the political spectrum, who still have some reservations about various policies that we're talking about or various people we're talking about. I mean, I spend much of my day interacting with college students who, on the whole, are a fairly left side of the continuum, politically speaking, kind of crowd, and yet you still get a lot of, in certain quarters, a lot of resistance to affirmative action policies or race as a plus factor in college admissions. You get a lot of resistance to really even talking about issues related to race and racism, be it conscious or less conscious. And so I think that the point raised is a good one. At the same time, I'm a little bit wary of blaming everything on sort of programming, quote unquote, because I do think that you see this as a more generalized phenomenon that white Americans who consider themselves to be middle of the road or even on the left are, in many respects, the more difficult crowd to deal with, as we were talking about, because they're telling you one thing, but yet their attitudes and ideologies on certain policies sometimes suggest something else.
The person that called in, last four digits 1383. Thank you for your question, Mr. Reed. Last four digits 1383. Your line should be open.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings, Professor Sommers.
You're a little low. Can you speak
okay.
up?
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay. I had a question for Mr. Sommers. With white people having this perception of being mistreated, can we expect, like, with what happened in Mississippi, Ole Miss recently, and also the re-election of President Obama, can we expect an increase in the number of violent acts committed against non-whites in the coming years?
Yeah, I don't know, and I hope not. And it is part of me as a social scientist who wants to see the data on these things before drawing conclusions. I mean, there's no doubt that there are really problematic and disturbing incidents that have happened in wake of the election, that happened before the election. Sometimes the really noteworthy and newsworthy ones catch our attention and make something seem even more widespread than it really is. I'm not suggesting that it's not widespread. It's hard to get a gauge on it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And so obviously only time will tell, and I would hope not. I would think that, but I would think it's certainly a possibility to keep an eye out for. I think that people get frustrated. They get very invested, and they get frustrated when elections don't go their way. And here we've seen an election obviously go one way, and so the fallout is yet to be seen. But it's a good question that we'll have to, time will tell, and we'll see what the data have to show for us. We, for the most part, are a country that you can celebrate the idea that even though we get caught up in these very heated and polarizing elections, the changing of the guard or the continuation of an administration is usually a largely peaceful process, and I think we all hope that will be the case once again. But the fallout from it, I guess we'll see, and we'll see what the numbers tell us, and we'll see how representative of a more general tendency these high-profile and problematic incidents turn out to be.
$1383. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. B Moore, I thought you had a hand up, but then I'm not seeing you on the line now. If you do have a question, just press *6 again, or anybody else. Okay. B Moore, your line should be open. Did you have a question for Dr. Sommers?
Greetings, Gus and Dr. Sommers. Dr. Sommers, I was wondering, how can people take the quote-unquote blinders off and start taking things into context?
Hi, sorry, I got a little feedback on the line. Could you just repeat the end of the question again?
Yes. How can people, I'll repeat the entire question. How can people take the blinders off and start taking things into context?
Well, the general proposition, my argument is that we spend a lot of our time making, sort of having knee-jerk emotion-based responses to what we see around us, and that it's understandable in some instances, obviously, too. That what you have to do is train yourself to take a step back and ask, what is the full extent of this situation? How might I have reacted differently in a different context? Is there an explanation for why the person I'm talking to here is behaving the way he or she is, as opposed to just jumping to a conclusion about that person? Sort of the major argument or thesis of my book, we were just talking about there, is this idea that situations matter, and when you learn to appreciate that in a variety of interactions, and both professional as well as more personal, you get a leg up and you're more effective in predicting and understanding human nature and where other people are coming from. So I think a lot of it is simply practice and is making the unconscious or or more sort of implicit assumptions or implicit influences on our behavior, making them more conscious and taking time to actually articulate them explicitly. And so that's really what the argument in the book is mostly training and learning to step back and say, what's really driving the behavior here? You know, why is this person behaving the way they are? Why have I reacted the way I have? And so on.
Thank you.
Person who dialed in, I think this might be Pumpkin. Pumpkin, did you have a question for Dr. Sommers?
Good afternoon, yes. I've been paying attention to, I guess, the sentiments of white people that I see voiced in media as well as on the internet and even in some personal conversations over the last 8 years, and I've noticed an increase of the America is dead, take our country back, this country's being ruined, you know, just all this type of fearful rhetoric from white people. And I noticed that it's not a coincidence that this is happening while a black or non-white person is the president. And it makes me think of the Reconstruction era when I read about it. And in the South, you had a lot of black people winning political seats. And even though they weren't mistreating white people and would even open schools and educate poor white children as well, there was still so much of a backlash from white people and what I perceive to be a fear. And I think it's related to white people's fear of them losing power and total domination. Have you heard white people around you that you talk to express, you know, something that would tend to lead to them feeling that way? Because it really does seem fear-based to me and not logical based on the evidence I see.
I think I would agree with that. Yeah, I've heard that sentiment. I think that the survey that we were just talking about, the study we were just talking about, captures it. This idea of sort of zero sum, this idea that there's a certain amount of, whether it's positive outcome or a certain amount of good treatment that's out there in society, and if somebody else is getting more of it, it means you're getting less of it. I do think I have heard that sentiment. I share your observation that you hear a lot of this talk about reclaiming our country and going back to the way things used to be when the changes in the country are not nearly as serious or stark as they're being made out to be. This idea that we somehow return to socialism or whatever the argument of the day would be. And so yes, I've heard those arguments, and I think I share your opinion of them, that they are based on the sense of a fear or an anxiety about losing some undefined something, and that's sort of what is playing itself out when you hear those opinions being voiced. And I think that that's a fair assessment. I've heard the same kinds of conversations, and it's always interesting, I think, when you hear someone pose the question to someone who says that, well, you're saying go back to our America, the way America used to be. Are you talking about an era when people of this background couldn't vote, or when it was only men who could vote? Are you talking about an era when the tax rates were actually much lower than they are even now, and so on and so forth? And so when you start to talk and break it down rationally, I think that you're right. I think the response is, no, I'm just talking about a more general feeling. I think it is less rational and less information-based and more fear, anxiety, or just concern-based.
Do you think that white people are a little too sensitive to criticism when it comes to the area of discussions on racism, white supremacy?
Oh, sure. I think we'd all benefit from the ability to say, here's the thing that I've tried to, there are times where I and some of my colleagues have done diversity or climate-related workshops with organizations or at the university or with certain groups on campus, and I think at some level the argument that needs to be made is that, look, we're all susceptible to these kinds of thought processes, to categorizing people, to falling victim to stereotypes. Here's why we're all susceptible to those things. It's not that we're hopelessly at the mercy of them. I mean, if we want to correct for them, control for them, account for them, and not have them influence us, we can do that. But the first step to doing that is accepting that we do fall victim to those patterns of thought. And so if you're not willing to accept that you fall victim to those thought patterns, then there's really no way to address the underlying issue. So yeah.
Is that, you're good, Pumpkin?
Yes, thank you.
Right on. Bruce Fine. If you had a question for Dr. Sommers, your line should be open.
Hi, good afternoon, Gus. Afternoon to the listeners and to your guest, Dr. Sommers. I just wanted to make a statement that it's the standard operating procedure of criminals, perpetrators, victimizers to blame their victims. For them, the victimizer, to say that it's my victim's fault. For a criminal to do their thing, to perpetrate a crime against their victims, they have to make that victim out to be the monster. They have to turn it. This is how they live with themselves. And I think white people do the exact same thing. Them claiming to be the victims, them claiming that their victim logically, after all of white people's actions, it's only logical that their victims be suspicious of white people and not trust white people. And this isn't something that's just been in the past. This is currently taking place. But again, a victimizer, a husband that abuses his wife, he says, "You make me do this to you." And I think it's just standard operating procedures of perpetrators. They don't look at themselves. And with all due respect to the guest, you being a member of the white group or what have you, I'm just hearing you make excuses saying that well we all have these things, we all feel this way, these biases or whatever, and you have an emotional attachment to your group. I guess it's kind of hard to look at your group and say, man, we have done inhumane things to people who have melanin. And you can't look at victims and say they've done this to us. This is a world that you guys have established, you maintain, and you benefit from. And to just say, that we all do this, that's not true. There's no evidence. The evidence points to this is something that is exclusive to white people. And white people don't want to give it up because you benefit from it. You get to dominate everybody. You get to abuse everybody. And that's all I wanted to say, Gus.
Yes, that was a statement. Dr. Sommers,
yes.
Did you want to respond?
Sure. I mean, in reality, I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, I do. Let me clarify. I have not, nor have I meant to convey the idea that what I'm suggesting is that, well, everybody's equally culpable here. Everybody sees the world in ways that are influenced by race, and so let's just call it a draw and just move forward, and let's not worry about the issue. That's certainly not been the point I've been trying to convey. I wholeheartedly agree that there's a unambiguous legacy and history that continues to this day of institutionalized as well as individualized racist acts and ideologies from mainstream white America, from white institutions, from white individuals, and I have no intent or desire or to refute any of that, because I think that that's pretty clear cut and true. I guess what I'm suggesting, I'm a social scientist, and I am here to talk about the data that I've collected, that folks in my field have collected, and what I'm suggesting is that what those data tell us is that, race influences all of us. Race influences the way that we see the world around us, that those individuals, those white individuals who tell you they're not influenced by race or they're colorblind, they don't think about these issues, that we know from the data that they do, that they're influenced by these things. I think that while I wholeheartedly, again, agree with the idea that you've got this institutional legacy, this quite problematic and in many cases horrific institutional history in this country and other countries of racism, I think that certainly there are white Americans in today's society who feel that, and I was answering Gus's question about where does this mindset come from. I think you've got folks of lower socioeconomic status who are struggling themselves, who see, they look at these issues, think, what am I benefiting? I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm actually one of the downtrodden masses who's trying to climb this uphill slope and not making it in society, and I resent being told that somehow I'm benefiting. I'm not benefiting at all. And we can argue, are they benefiting? Do you still, is privilege in being a white person in this society or in any society that we're talking about in terms of the assumptions people make about you, the doors that are opened and not closed to you, and so forth. But we certainly live in a society with a lot of class-based bias as well. And again, I think what I was speaking to was the specific question of where does this mindset come from, not to justify it or to exonerate prejudice or racism by any means, but to sort of shed a little light on what we as social scientists know about that issue. And so that's the way I was sort of approaching the questions as they were posed to me.
One thing I did want to get in, you were saying some white people who might be from a lower socioeconomic background. In your study, whites see racism as a zero-sum game that they are now losing. One of the points that I thought was very important, when you controlled for age and education, you still saw the same response with regards to white people thinking that there's an increase in this attack on white people. Very important point that I wanted to get in. We have about 5 minutes. So if you got a final quick question, now would be the time to get your hand up for anyone listening in. I did also, Dr. Sommers has done a lot of research on issues dealing with racism. He has another study that he worked on. It's colorblindness and interracial interaction, playing the political correctness game. I just want to read this segment and get Dr. Sommers' comments. Fascinating study, and this is also available online. Rather than supporting a general tendency for individuals to lack awareness of their facility with racial categorization, these data support the conjecture that whites' underestimation of this ability results from a specific desire, one not shared by our black participants, to appear unprejudiced. Finally, the fact that no underestimation emerged in whites' reports of ability to categorize by background color suggests that it is not color itself, but rather the meaning of color when associated with ethnicity that led to the observed discrepancies among whites. I thought this fascinating. For listeners who haven't read the study, they would have folks in this experiment and they would show photographs. It'd be a white person or a black person, and they ask them before giving these photographs, estimate how good you think you would be able to pick out the racial classification of an individual. And the pattern that they observed was that white people underestimated their ability to accurately categorize the race of the person in these photographs, and they did not see that tendency in black people when they asked the same thing. And so what I just read there, suggesting that this might be something that's being done on purpose so that they can appear to be not racist. Did I give an accurate interpretation, and can you share some thoughts on this, Dr. Sommers?
Yeah, basically what we're studying in that research is this idea that you hear from a lot of Americans, a lot of white Americans, frankly, today, which is this idea that they're colorblind and they don't see color. And Stephen Colbert likes to make fun of it, but it's only a slight exaggeration. This idea that I don't see color, and therefore it doesn't influence me. And what we're finding in that study is, this is something that a lot of white Americans do, and frankly, it's disingenuous, is what we know from the research. I mean, at the very least, it's naive and mistaken idea, but at worst, it's disingenuous. It's this effort to sort of claim, I don't even see this, I don't notice this, I don't think about this, so therefore I can't be part of the problem. You even see sort of co-opting of Martin Luther King's, I have a dream speech, and this idea that aren't we supposed to judge people, by the content of their character and not notice skin color and so on and so forth, and that's exactly what I do. And what we find in that study as well, that's not really what people do, and we know based on neuroscience data that within 100 or 150 milliseconds, so less than a fifth of a second, like the time it takes you to sneeze, people notice race. They notice racial categories, ethnic categories of the people they're interacting with. And so people pick this up quickly, and sure, if we're motivated to control for that and correct for it and not have it influence our judgments and to be colorblind in the way we evaluate candidates for a job, well, we can try to get ourselves into that mindset. But this idea that we've got substantial numbers of Americans walking around, substantial numbers of white Americans for whom they're literally colorblind and don't even notice race, in some sort of post-racial utopia or what have you, we know that the data are basically telling us no, that's not the case. We notice race, and people are going out of their way to act as if they don't because they're hoping that creates a positive impression or gets them off the hook for being accused of harboring any sort of prejudice or bias.
In this same study, your results also suggested that when you have these white people who allege that, hey, I don't see color and, I just judge people on the basis of their character, that when white people do this, that there is a cost, that they appear to be less friendly. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, so what we did, this is I think is actually my favorite part of the study because I think it's creative and I think it leads to a really important conclusion. So we have these people interacting, playing this photo identification game where you're asking questions and trying to figure out the photo that your partner's holding and so forth. And again, a lot of the white participants in the study are going out of their way not to talk about race. They're not asking about race because they think somehow, again, that's going to lead to a positive impression. What we find out, though, is if we videotape these sessions and we show the videotapes to people who know nothing about the study, and in fact, silent videotapes, don't even let them hear what's being said, but just look at the nonverbal body language of the people involved, those white participants who are not asking about race, who are trying to be colorblind and try to avoid the topic of race altogether, they're judged as being more distracted, as being more disengaged or less engaged in the conversation, as being not as warm. I mean, they make a more negative impression socially because they're distracted and they're trying to figure out how do I do this without talking about race, as opposed to someone who is engaging in a more fluent and natural manner and makes a better impression. So ironically, this effort to make a good impression or at least avoid a bad one by not talking about race, the folks in the study are making a worse impression.
Both of these reports, I think, great information. They are available online. You can check them out. You can also visit Dr. Sommers' website, which again is www.samsommers.com. Are you going to be following up on the white people alleging that they are victims of racism post-election? Are you going to be following up on that study, particularly since you're getting all these emails?
It's a general area of research that I and my colleagues are interested in. I think it's important set of questions to help us set the stage for what really is the context in which these contemporary discussions and debates and arguments about race are taking place. And so, these questions about perceptions of racism in society, how people communicate and don't communicate when it comes to race in smaller scale conversations, how groups' diversity actually influences the way that a group performs, and so forth. That's the body of research, the areas of study that I'm interested in and continue to pursue.
Gus.
Yes, ma'am.
May I ask one last question?
Dr. Sommers,
do you have a question?
Sure.
Oh. Being a social scientist, have you noticed that anti-blackness seems to be a worldwide phenomenon, that whoever is considered black in countries are considered to be the lesser, and who's ever considered white or light or what have you, they seem to, I'm going to use this word, Gus, fare better in that society. I was watching a video on YouTube where you had people in Palestine and people in Israel, and these two groups are known to be at each other's throats or what have you. But yet in both countries, they both come together on their dislike or hatred for whoever is considered black in that nation. And I think that is something that needs to be studied as well. And also, have you done any studies in this country, on African Americans and the effects of being in a country for 500 years or so where you are hated, and the effects on our psyche, and how that affects us?
The short answer is yes to both questions. Take the second one first. There is an extensive body of social science research that's looked at these issues from the perspective of well, if we want to think about, stereotyping and racism and bias from the perspective of the target, from the people who are on the receiving end of those negative outcomes, of those negative beliefs, of that antipathy and so forth. And I mean, as I imagine you would assume, and as your question implies, I mean, there's clear evidence of the negative implications that has psychologically, the negative implications for questions of identifying in certain domains. I mean, you find that students, for example, who encounter stereotypes about their racial or ethnic group, one of the reactions they sometimes have is to disengage from that domain of academics or that particular field and that discipline, and put their self-esteem in other domains and other areas where it's not going to be at risk to the same extent. Or there's even research that ties the experience of racism and prejudice in with real psychological and health problems, hypertension, as well as a variety of other health problems from just encountering the microaggressions, the individual level prejudices and negative outcomes that one experiences on a regular basis.
Right.
Your first question about sort of the pervasiveness of this idea of blackness and across cultures, and there are really interesting and sobering data that suggests that looking across cultures, that darker skin tones are often associated with negative stereotypes. I mean, you see evidence of, just look at skin lightening products in some countries in Asia and even in Latin America. About the idea of lightening one's skin is often seen as a manifestation of the desire to avoid some of those negative assumptions or negative perceptions of darker skin tones. Actually, I have a colleague at Tufts, a good friend of mine and colleague whose office is right next door to mine, Keith Maddox, who studies, and Professor Maddox studies the sort of skin tone bias that's pretty common in our society here in the U.S., and the idea that it is the case that people with darker skin tones, so African Americans with darker skin tones, or who are seen as having more stereotypically African American features, tend to be prejudiced against, stereotyped against more so than individuals who have lighter skin tones or who have less stereotypically black, quote unquote, features. And so you see that even within our society, I think some of the interesting findings in Professor Maddox's work is that you see some of the sentiment even among African American populations, that there are, if you look among black respondents, more negative associations as a whole with darker skin tones within the population as opposed to lighter skin tones. And so this is a pattern that is pretty problematically pervasive across cultures, and even here in the U.S. within different responding groups, where you even see African Americans sometimes being more willing to ascribe negative stereotypes and negative perceptions to their fellow African Americans who have darker skin tones. So you're right to point that out, to think about that. That is an important issue, and it's one that you see
and that was
not just here in the U.S.
Right, and that was my reason for about the effects. Black people did not, that didn't just creep into our minds to be anti-black against ourselves. We got that. That's one of the results of being abused by white people. That was beat into us to hate ourselves and to love white people. And with white people ruling the planet, that sentiment has been put onto the world from white people. That didn't just come from nowhere. It's white people's anti-blackness that your group has gone around and established throughout the planet. So when people study these things and say black people have this sentiment, this color conscious, you got to put in the cause. We love to talk about the effect, but the cause is white people. The problem is white people. The blame is at white people's door, and that's just real. And unless we talk serious like that, if white people truly really want to end the system of racism and white supremacy, and by the way, I don't think they do, you will begin to say, white people will begin to say, what is my problem that I have with the melanin people of the planet, the dominant people of the planet? Why have I put this anti-melanin, anti-blackness throughout the planet? And that's all I want to say. And I apologize, Gus, for going overboard.
Well, I mean, you also apologize to me. You invited a social scientist onto the show, not a philosopher who's going to talk to you about ethics and morality, not a historian who's going to talk to you about centuries and centuries of disenfranchisement and violence and aggression. I mean, these are true. These all exist. You brought onto the show a social scientist who is studying in this day and age what are the attitudes, effects, experiences of Americans with regard to these issues, and that's my research and what I've been focusing on. I don't disagree with the entire context that you've set up. It comes from somewhere. It doesn't just magically materialize. I guess what I will add, and what I will push back on a little bit is, I think we're now clearly at a point in our society where even if, and I'm not suggesting it's the case, even if every white person out there, every non-African American in the entire country said exactly what you said, I don't want to contribute to this, what have I done to contribute to this, and what can I do to prevent it, it's still there. And so even with that, I think you still have a problem to wrestle with, and it's not as easy as having individuals say, well, what is it that I've done to help propagate this? Because frankly, for many individuals, they can't see a connection that they have. Now, that doesn't mean that they are not still part of the same institutions and benefits of the same privilege that other white Americans are. I mean, that all remains the case as well. But I think it unfortunately becomes an even more complicated scenario than what we're talking about here, because even if you have individuals recognizing that historically that has been an issue, it's still there, it's still embedded in our cultural DNA, and just simply saying that and saying, well, I don't want it to be there anymore is not enough either.
Fascinating. Thank you, everyone, all of the folks who dialed in, and Dr. Sommers for sharing some of his Monday afternoon with us. Very much enjoyed the dialogue. I hope listeners did as well, and we'll be checking out your work. You can then visit the website samsommers.com. Thank you, Dr. Sommers. We will definitely be keeping an eye on your work.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Take care, sir. Context of White Supremacy. Fascinating exchange. I think he requested an apology there. We will take a quick commercial break. Then if any of the folks that are listening in, if you have any thoughts on the information in the program or anything else you want to get in really quick, we'll get that in once we're done with the commercial break. I will say, if anyone would like to invest in the cows, I would like a new headset. My headset, I think, is about to die on me. New headset. It is on my Amazon wish list. You can go to Amazon.com, Gus T Renegade. It's under my name, Gus T Renegade. And the headset should be at the top of the list. I don't think it's super pricey. Anyone out there, if they would like to contribute, invest in the cows, new headset for Gus, I would be most appreciative. All right, we'll take a quick commercial. Be right back. Context of White Supremacy.
RacismDaily.com, your number one source for global news reports on race, racism, and overt actions of white supremacy. From Asia to the Americas, to Europe, to Australia, to Africa, racism is not a thing of the past, it is our current reality. Be informed, be globally informed. You should be the first to know. RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions, so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Do you need a one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs? Triumphant Multimedia is a skilled team of professionals with a passion for great marketing and chic design. Our specialties include consulting, brand development, copywriting, and creative graphic design that's second to none. We also offer photography, photo retouching, videography, and video editing. At Triumphant Multimedia, our goal is to provide highly effective creative solutions built to suit any individual need or budget. Give us a call at 678-732-8067 or check us out online at trimultimedia.com.
Hi everyone, welcome. This is Justice with the C.O.W.S radio program. If you want to learn about, understand, and counter racism, white supremacy, be sure not to miss a C.O.W.S episode. We keep them jammed, packed with constructive information to sharpen your use of words to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy, ASAP. Also, to be able to invest in my counter-racist efforts, co-hosting the C.O.W.S radio programs, please visit my blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com.
Here's just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
I got an uncle real crazy. My Uncle B, 55 years old, hates white people, married to a white lady. And he sit around going, these crackers ain't shit, except for Susan. And he tried to explain the whole thing to me one day, say, yeah, I got a white wife, I love her, she love me, that's all that matter. But I tell you this, if the revolution ever come, I'll kill her first. Just to show these crackers I mean business. Motherfucking cracker ass, motherfucking cracker. Shit cracker, motherfucker. Hey, hi, honey. Motherfucking cracker, I'll kill my cracker kids too.
Context of White Supremacy. Wowee. Before I get to the folks that are listening in, if you all want to share. Hello, Dr. Trav. 41510.com. Person responsible for the design for the counter-racist t-shirts. Always good to see Dr. Trav. Wednesday, we'll be back. Next program, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm not sure. I was talking to Pam at the end of last week, and we were supposed to be trying to do a program. I'm not sure if Pam and I are hanging out on Wednesday or if we'll be doing a different program. But either way, if Pam is not hanging out with us on Wednesday to do the program, I had told folks before when I did not have my computer and we were off the air for a couple weeks back at the beginning of October. And during a brief portion of our hiatus, I actually was on vacation. And even when I was on vacation, I was still on my counter-racist grind. And I was able to go out and hang out. And I was telling you all some of the stuff that I was doing while I was on vacation. One of those episodes, I had on my counter-racist t-shirt, Please Respect Me Like I Am a White Person. Those are still available. If you would like a shirt, shoot me an email. They're $20. That includes shipping, $20. You can get your shirt. Just shoot me an email. You can PayPal the funds, and we will mail it out to you. At any rate, I had on my counter-racist t-shirt, and I was eating vegan birthday cake with a Chinese female in a monastery talking about racism. And I didn't really explain anymore. I just kind of left it there, and people had emailed me and like, are you going to finish the story? That sounds like it could be constructive. And it was constructive. It ended up being a 2-day dialogue with illustrations of my points that I was making about racism. So we will make time. They were just, and that's just one of the constructive moments that I had while I was actually on vacation over the break. I'll share some of that. So we'll be here. I'm not quite sure what we'll be doing, but we will be here Wednesday. It might be Pam, might be Gus, who knows, but we'll be here on Wednesday evening. The headset, top priority. Definitely need that headset. If anybody out wants to invest, if you have a few bucks that you would like to contribute to the C.O.W.S effort, headset, Gus would be most appreciative. Let's see. Final thought before I hit the folks on the phone line. I guess I'll share it. I'll share it later. I was a little surprised, pleasantly surprised. We had a lot of participation for an early program. I know frequently when we don't broadcast at our normal evening time, we don't have as many live participants. But then we had quite a few folks dialed in today, and then I remembered, oh, I bet a lot of you all have a vacation from the plantation for so-called Veterans Day. I suspect that might have contributed to our boost in early callers, which is always good to hear from everyone. Everybody that dialed in, so that would be, I think, Praz, Pumpkin, Bruce Fine, and B More. Your line should be open. The other folks, our UK caller, I see you as well. Good to see you. Some of the other folks that I recognize. If you all have comments, press *6. The other folks, your lines are open. My one-word comment on what happened at the end, the exchange between Bruce Fine and Dr. Sommers, Yurugu. I will just let that sit. You all can think about it, but Yurugu, that's what I was reminded of. Did you all have anything you wanted to share?
I applaud Bruce Fine. I enjoyed it.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Gus, I apologize to you for when I said going overboard. And I think he came back and said no apologies necessary. He's a social scientist or something, like that. And I'm thinking I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to the host, Gus. Gus. So I don't know. Maybe he misunderstood or whatever. I don't know.
I think if I heard him correctly, and the other folks that are listening, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think he said you should apologize to me. I think that's what he said. I think he requested an apology or implied that you had done something incorrect, that you had wronged him somehow, and that you should be apologizing to him. I thought that's what he said. Now, I might be wrong. If that's not what he said, just chime in and let me know. But I think that's what he said.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know if people heard that or what have you, but I think that's what he said. Oh, I'm getting feedback too. I don't know where that's. Oh, I don't hear it now. Okay. Oh, I do. I didn't hear it for a second, but now I am hearing it. I'm getting feedback from a line. Well, I guess no one has anything to say. That is social. People, all these the callers. I thought folks would have something to share. I guess not. Did you all find any of the information to be of constructive value from the reports, or anything else that he shared, or his exchange with Bruce Fine towards the end?
Gus, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I was using my headset, and for some reason it was malfunctioning when you had the feedback. I'm sorry. I noticed he is definitely a wordsmith. I mean, I'm going to have to go back to the archives to go and rewind what he was saying, because his answers, it's kind of like he would agree with what you said. He would say, I agree with most of what you said, but he wouldn't specify what he didn't agree with. And then when I asked him about should we expect there to be more violent acts against non-white people, he was very much, I was asking him, his opinion, but he said, we would hope not, but, we'll continue to collect more data and do more research. And so he very skillfully dodged that question. and I feel that maybe he was dishonest in certain respects, but I have to go back and listen to the archives where I could point out specifically, because he was using as Justice would say, buckets and buckets of words, and that was it.
Yeah, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I definitely agree. I felt like it was just more of the same, different day, the same old standard operating procedure. I agree on the buckets and buckets of words, the Voltroning, same old.
When I was hearing hearing them talk about how white people think that they are victims, or at least they're saying that or pretending to be victims, it made me think of two links that I saw on Krieg's page. I think the DWC project posted one of them, and then someone else posted a link in the comments. And the first article was about recognizing the signs of a psychopath, and then the second one was about a sociopath and, bullet pointing characteristics and behaviors of sociopaths. And I couldn't help it as I read both of those, with the understanding I do have of racism, white supremacy. It was white people all day. As far as white culture, if you get a chance and you can read both of those, man, it ties in with Yurugu, with what he was talking about, with them perceiving themselves to be victims. It's insanity. Because I've seen white people claim to be victims of racism and turn right around and call a black person a nigger and degrade them in the next breath.
Those are definitely the signs of narcissists and psychopaths is that they have to make their victim the monster. They have to tell them so in order to sleep at night or sleep during the day whenever they sleep, to lie down and get up and do it again. They have to, when they look in the mirror, see an innocent person, see a victim, and justify what they're doing to people. It's like the priest who came out and said that the children are flirting with the priest and causing them to molest them. I remember a pedophile Oprah Winfrey had interviewed, and that's what he said he would tell himself. He would tell himself that little 6-year-old girl is flirting with him, and she's making him do this to her, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and to me, when you have to tell yourself those things, you know that what you're doing is incorrect, it's unjust, but you're going with that urge anyhow. And to live with yourself, you have to make your victim your victimizer. You, the perpetrator, have to act like you're the prey.
If I may interject, this Scotty Reed calling back in. To the last callers or the lady that was making that point, how are they, I think they're being taught that they're victims. Everything that she expressed, that's being taught. And my question to Dr. Sommers, I think it is he who is discounting the influence of conservative media. Now, when it comes to white people, it don't matter if they Democrat or Republican. If that white person says something that they identify with because they are white, it doesn't matter if they express it publicly or not. It's evident through the policies that they support or don't support. And, these rabid right-wing racist white people, your Tea Party people, they are reaching across the aisle and spreading their racism. You know, they have different labels for these people, but I mean, it's cut and dry. You know, one of the things I read, it said that racist, white supremacists, all of them are white, but not all white people are racist, white supremacists. So to his point about, you know, where there are some liberal people and they wouldn't go along with that, but are they pushing to end it? And, you know, these are seditious acts if you want to look at it from a legal construct of Trump. You know, these white people are saying, well, if Trump can get away with making a seditious statement, if the Virginia Republicans can call for armed revolution, then so can I. You know, and maybe those people have my back. I mean, this is very dangerous stuff that's being spread across the media, and it is all in response to the re-election of a black president. And so, you know, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Scotty, I don't blame the media. And before there was this widespread media, you can look back in history and see the same behavior and responses from white people to the perceived loss. And
they had media back then. They had media back then from the founding.
Like I said, before there was widespread media like there is today, we saw that. Before there was Donald Trump, for the last 4 years, when Barack Obama was running, when it looked like he was going to be successful, I saw white people putting videos about arming themselves and the economy's going to tank and buying up arms. I saw all of that before. I don't think white people need the media to teach them this. I think it's inherently part of their culture. So I don't think they need Donald Trump to send them a message, oh, my goodness, white people are going to lose. They've already got a codified system where he doesn't
this is unprecedented, though. What Trump is doing.
Hold on, because I didn't interrupt you. They didn't need Donald Trump to say, white people, we are losing. They already have a codified system where they can communicate this to each other without ever mentioning the word white. If you go back in history, you'll find the same thing. You'll find it in small towns of white people when they attack black towns at the perceived threat of losing power because they don't want black people to have anything. Black people can't have a town where they don't depend on white people for all of their resources because it means a loss of power or somehow in their psychotic minds the victimization of whites, and then they go burn it down. I don't accept that these are things other white people have to teach white people in order for them to do it. It's part of their culture. They've been doing this for close to 500 years.
Okay, if I may retort, media has been around for thousands of years, whether it's depictions of subjects, whether it's destroying Black Madonna, so-called paintings, just destroying, that is all media. Even from the founding of this country, they had newspapers, and that is how they mass communicate their ideals, just like every other person. And so, no, I'm not blaming it on the media, but I'm saying the media is being used to in support of racism, white supremacy. So that's all I'm saying. I mean, media has always been there. That is the books. All of this is being communicated, but never before in the history of what we call in the United States of America have I ever read or heard of people openly, powerful white people openly challenging the established order, openly calling for a revolution.
You don't see that back during the period of the Civil War and the so-called Civil War and the Revolutionary War? And
yes, that's the only other time, Lincoln, when he so-called, which he didn't do, freed the slaves, but when he emancipated them. And of course, he was assassinated, but that's the only other period that I see in history of that occurring.
You can find white people over in the UK talking about it. When they see a white candidate who they think is going to give too much freedom to non-white people and allow too many non-white Muslims in or too many immigrants, you see the same backlash. You see the same response.
So I'm just saying this program behavior, like, for example, these teenage racists that was tweeting, they reelected the nigger and this and that. And then, the people who originally did the study wanted to protect their identities. And as it was pointed out to me, whenever a black child misbehaves or other otherwise acts in what they have said is an unacceptable manner, you know, they are just inherently bad. They bad. They ain't got no parenting, this, that, and the other. Try them in the criminal courts as adults, and then but these white kids, they're just acting out and this and that, and we shouldn't take it serious. You know, and then now that people are revealing who these white teenagers are and calling, you know, the school districts and referring to the student code of conduct and all of that, now it's a backlash against revealing their identities because they want to protect little teenage racists to grow up to be adult racists. And that's, and again, social media. It's all being, you know, and it's, if it's just accepted openly and allowed to continue, I mean, just look at the Nazis and how we were, you know, we read how, you know, they was able to target the Jews, even though there's not much talk about their African victims. But all of this was justified through the media. Joseph Goebbels is known as the master of propaganda, and that's why white German people sat by while, you know, these people were rounded up and mass murdered, you know, that they even turned it into a they had factories to kill people. And how does this become acceptable to a civil society? Through the social media controls.
What do you
Thank you. That's all Huh?
What do you define as civil, as far as a civil society?
Well, there isn't one, but that's why I said what they call a civil society. It isn't civilized.
When you said earlier that not all white people are racist, I can't agree to that simply because I don't have evidence that they're not.
I didn't
racist.
write that.
No, you
but
said it
I read
earlier.
it. Yeah, I read it. I think it comes from Fuller. I'm still trying to verify that.
Okay. Yeah, I would never say that. Not as long as this system exists. They could all be, I don't know.
And that's my point.
Based on that,
He's trying to say, well, you know, these white people, leftists or whatever, they would never, no, that's not true. The so-called leftists, Democrats, and liberals worked with Republican Richard Nixon to rapidly and dramatically increase the re-enslavement of black people through what they call the drug war. So it is perfect that you could look to Clinton and him working with a Republican Congress. So I disagree with him on the point, liberals wouldn't do it. I think he was sort of suggesting, or he was saying, I don't want to give him an excuse, and I agree with that. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that thing about liberals being our friends, the John Browns, the Jane Browns. I mean, God, they are the most cunning, and the covert, the sneaky, slick racist. They come with a smile. I think that's how anyone is. When they want to deceive you, they don't come and say, I'm coming up here to deceive you out of your money. They come with a smile. They come nice. And it's just amazing how much damage they do versus someone who stands up flat-footed and tells you, look, nigga, I want you under my foot, to stay there, and what you gonna do about it? But that cunning smile, and it's like everybody gets you with that smile and sweet words and flowery words, and I mean that those are the most dangerous because people get lost. It's like that guy said, it's a soothing lotion. It's to lull you to sleep.
Bill Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the important points I took away just from today's broadcast, I agree. I think most of what everyone has said, I think, is extremely accurate about the words and not being clear. I think my fair count got up to 6. I think he used fair 3 times just when he was responding to my definition about racism, white supremacy. I think it popped up at least 3 times there, and then at some other critical junctures when he was making a point, that term fair popped up. But for me, I thought it was very important because I think for a lot of non-white people, we think that, hey, it won't be a problem. White people, they'll be cool. They're not going to go out and look to harm me or become more violent, more aggressive in the practice of racism, white supremacy, unless they perceive a problem, unless they think that, you know, something bad is going to happen to white people, unless they really believe that there's a threat to them, an impending chance that something bad could happen to them. And I don't think that's true. I think for white people, the evidence shows that they frequently are able to successfully rally large numbers of white people to go out and commit all kinds of savage acts, violence, rape, pillage, killing large numbers of people on a lie. And it can be that many of the white people who are participating in this can know now what the reason that we're giving for all of our savage conduct is a lie. We're saying that these black people did something, that they raped a white woman, weapons of mass destruction. This is standard operating procedure, I believe. Sorry, I'm adjusting my headset, sorry. I believe, as Bruce Fein said, standard operating procedure. So I would just say that I think there are a significant number of white people who really, as I said, they're disgusted about President Obama, him being in the White House. They're upset about that, and they might, you know, really feel like, man, the country is slipping away from us, the niggers are taking over. You might have a segment that really feel that way, and they would be a problem. You also have a large segment of white people who know good and darn well President Obama is there because we allow that nigger to be there. We are running the show. We are in charge, and these black people are confused. We got it. There's no threat. Even knowing that, they would still be totally willing to ride on a lie. Yep, the niggas are taking over. They took over the election. We're losing our country. We need to go do something. You have a large chunk of white people who would have no problem riding on that. I thought that that is real important to keep that in mind. There doesn't have to be any evidence. It doesn't have to be based on logic. It doesn't have to be based on reason. White people are always down to make up a lie that will give them justification, at least in their mind. Crazy though it may seem, they are always down to ride on any sort of racist campaign against non-white people, even when they know we're doing what we do, just lying and making up stuff so we can go out and practice racism.
Mm-hmm. And they kind of remind me, since this word has been thrown around so much in the last year or so, bully. You know, that bully, you know, on the schoolyard, they know they pick on people just because today is Monday. I'm going to go out and pick on people because I know I can get away with it. I know they can't do anything about it. They can't fight me back or even if they attempt to fight, the Jews or whatever. It took a more powerful country to go over to a powerful country to tell them what to do, to let them go, or the surviving Jews or whatever countries who participated. You're going to give them reparations too. And that's just an example of, if you're not able to protect your stuff, to protect your body, to protect your family or whatever, some criminal-minded person is going to come over and try to enact their will upon you. And except you're able to defend what is yours, you will end up taking over. And that bully mentality just because they can get away with it. White people know they are powerful, and they act like people who know that they are in power, and there's nothing that you can do about it. When you know you the baddest on the block, or your brother is the baddest, you act like it. You become very arrogant, and you just go around messing with people because you can, and that's just what they do.
Absolutely. I mentioned Urugu about the exchange that Bruce Fine had with Dr. Sommers at the end. Actually, you can even go all the way back to earlier in probably the entire interview, but I was thinking specifically the exchange where the universalism, he was trying to say that this tendency is human nature. That was the term he used, that this is human nature. People just tend to do this, and he seemed resistant to acknowledging that this behavior is exclusive to white people. I don't see a record of black people fabricating, just going around and making up. We're just going to make up that these white people over here did this to us, and we'll use this as justification for us to go over here and mistreat these white people. I just don't see a record of that. Even with other groups of non-white people, I just don't see a pattern of behavior. It might be a one-time incident, but a consistent record of this is something that we do on a regular basis. Just totally make up lies about other people attacking us or other people being a threat to us so that we'll have this false justification for mistreating them. I just don't think that is not honest at all. I would say anytime that a white person says that, I would say they are consciously, willfully, deliberately practicing racism by trying to attribute their racist behaviors to everybody on the planet, and that is simply not true. Urugu, right. Her concept of universalism. I'll mute my line if y'all had anything.
That's true, Gus. Trying to attribute their racist behavior to be categorizing it as normal behavior. This is what everybody does. And it kind of makes me think of an insane person who has a need to feel normal, who has a need in a society of normal people. They are abnormal, but they need their abnormality to be seen as the norm. So that's what they tell themselves, that the normal people are actually abnormal, and that anyone who exhibits the behavior that they do, well, this is normal, and I think white people do that because they need to feel normal, and it's not normal behavior. It is exclusive to them and their pathology and their narcissistic, antisocial behavior.
I think it helps them camouflage too. I think that's a huge advantage. I think it could be both. I think another thing that aids them with this tool of extrapolating their behaviors and saying that this is applicable to everybody, white people and non-white people, it helps, or it prohibits, I'll say it this way, it prohibits non-white people from seeing white people as they are, that these people should stick out. Just looking at their behavior patterns, they should stick out. Like, wait a minute, they should be looked at as a whole nother entity, and the way that they behave, the way that they treat us, the way that they function collectively, worldwide, through generations. Doesn't matter if we're talking about 1920, 1820, 2020, same behavior patterns of what they're doing, a few little new wrinkles here and there, but it's basically the same thing. That should be isolated and looked at as something that is distinct to this specific group of people who say that they are white. That is a major advantage of that sort of universalism. Use what Dr. Anise said, universalism. It's a major benefit for racist man, racist woman, and racist child to do that. So it's not racism. Everybody does this. We can't be sitting here picking on white people. Bill Maher is great. Everybody has, a moment where they lie or say something about another group of people, which it totally works to their advantage. we have the people that are hanging out listening, but they're not sharing. Unless anybody has anything they want to share, we can wrap up in about 10 minutes. We'll have done our 2 hours, and we'll be back Wednesday, so we'll have more. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to share? Our Skype caller in the UK, good to see you as well, sir. I've been saying Jimmy Savile's name correctly. Thank you. Anybody else had anything to share? I would say get your hand up next 5 minutes or so if you have anything else that you want to touch on.
I do want to suggest if anyone sees incidents online of white people making threats to President Obama, or saying that they think he should be killed or harmed or things like that, or even just being racist, my suggestion is to screen cap it. Make sure you note the information about who that person is. I think it would be very constructive counter warfare to maybe make a blog highlighting these incidents. Make sure you put that person's name and location in the description of the picture so it shows up on Google search. And I think this would be constructive in possibly getting some of these people to be affected in their wallets. I read a story online about a particular white female that was doing that, and someone captured it, put it on the internet, and her employers found out about it, and she got fired.
I have seen that happen, at least reported. I think, as Mr. Fuller says, white people don't get fired, they get transferred. So I'm sure these racists are not going to be struggling to get re-employment on the plantation. But I have seen quite a few reports where white people, the white woman who said that she hoped President Obama's assassinated, and she got on, she called him a nigger. They did the television interview with her, and they said, "Do you really think of the president as a nigger?" And she was, the response, I played it on the call, and her response was, yeah. Oh my God. You gotta see it with the video so you can see her facial response to all this. But they did say that she was fired. I think it was a white woman in Chicago. She was making similar posts on Facebook, and they said that she was fired as well. So I've seen where, at least white people are reporting that they are responding to this when you capture it, when you notify folks and what have you. I have seen several reports of other white people taking action and firing. So that might be a very effective strategy. Well, I won't say very effective, but I can see where it could generate some results. Again, white people do not get fired, they get transferred.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's good, too, because when you have victims saying, oh, racism doesn't exist, oh, white people are getting better. If you have a website where stories like that, just like what Cynical African does, but where stories showing you evidence of real white people with their faces, their names, their actual comments screen capped on the screen, I think that's pretty effective to establish that this is a problem and people can't deny it. If you go to President Barack Obama's Facebook page or the one for Michelle Obama, I mean, it's just like they come there like flies and just leave all kind of racist garbage, and you could screen cap it all day and fill up a website. But, if you put it on a blog or something, it's there. It's going to stay there, and it should be global. I just think it can be effective counter-propaganda.
And the thing with our confusion with white people being in charge of words and defining those words, where racism is now not exclusive, the word racism that's been pushed out into society now in schools and everything is not just something that's exclusively associated with white people. So for confused victims, when you show them this collage of racist sentiments by white people, then, sometimes a confused victim will say, well, my uncle said, he can't stand those crackers, so racism is on both sides, and they are masterful at getting victims, as Gus was saying about the universalism, to see, hey, and I think even the guest that Gus had, I'm loco and I'm racist too. I think that was the title of the book. Where they are masterful at getting victims to agree that, hey, we all do this, and we just all need to sit down at the table and realize that we both are to blame, and we need to stop this, and us, and it's a good idea, but we need to define these words as well, because they are constantly redefining so that it does not make them, so these things aren't exclusive to them.
Well, you know what? What I'm finding in the things that I'm seeing, the behavior is exclusive to, I haven't seen one black person on any of these forums go to either Michelle Obama or the president's page and call either one of them a nigger, say that a picture of them embracing each other is disgusting, or leave comments like yuck or that's so nasty. I mean, seriously, it's like astoundingly white. So
Right.
I've been screen capping it. And if I never said the word racism, I think if a person saw the things that they were saying, it would be pretty clear that this is a white sentiment. And I'm not saying every white person feels that way, but when I see all this garbage, I don't see any black people. I think I may have seen one non-black, non-white person, and I think in the cover photo that she had on her Facebook timeline, she was hugged up with a white person. But it's even if you didn't say it, if you just show a collection of all of this post, him being reelected, I don't think you even need to narrate or say much.
Right, and with white people also taking charge of their image, I would say, is again the victims with the things that you just mentioned. They've been so crafty at getting their victims to say, "Oh, that's those ignorant people. They're so silly and ignorant." Like Archie Bunker wasn't a racist; he was a big goofball. He was low level, a dumb guy, didn't finish school, and this is how they have their victims seeing that these are just some silly, stupid, foolish people doing foolishness, and not seeing the seriousness of it, because white people have been able in the last 40 to 50 years take the word racism, and that's why Gus talks about the importance of words and defining those words. They've redefined what racism is, and that it's just some silly, stupid white people, and some silly, stupid black people, and some silly, stupid other victims. It's something else.
I would also toss in, I know from this summer when the Gabrielle Union, when people were talking bad about her hair online. Right.
Gabrielle Good.
Right. This summer. Did I say Gabby?
No, I said it and corrected myself.
Oh, okay.
You said Gabrielle Union, the actress.
Oh, okay. Right on. My bad. Gabrielle Douglas. Thank you. Gabrielle Douglas from this past summer, when people were talking about her hair and talking all ugly this summer, and they were saying that it was black people. I remember that was a big thing, like even when some of the mainstream media outlets, when they picked up the story and they were attributing this to black people who were making these comments. I would also say that I have seen enough behavior online that I suspect that some of this, white people are putting up photos of black people or non-white people as their avatar, and then they'll make their racist comments so that they can slip under the radar. They won't be perceived as a racist. It'll just be, oh, well, see, this is a black person saying it, so it can't be racist. I suspect you'll probably be getting more of that as white people refine, and as they see, oh, okay, they're starting to at least make it look like they're trying to go after white people who are being racist online. So I'll make sure I get a black sounding name or a black photograph picture of some black people, and that way, it won't be racism. They'll just say, oh, well, this is just a black person. So I would have some suspicion if you see some comments and it looks racist and it's got a black photo, it could be a white person that is just doing some pretending online. But the screen capture, I do think that's a great idea. Whether you could do YouTube videos or the blog, like Pumpkin was saying. If you have a Mac, they have a default screen capture where you can take a shot of your whatever's on your screen, it's hold down Command, Shift, and the number 3 if you have a Mac. Command, Shift, 3. And this is default. It should work on any Mac. Command, Shift, 3, and it'll screenshot. It'll just take a photo of everything that's on your screen. And then if you want to crop, it's Command, Shift, 4. And it'll give you the option of cropping and just taking a photograph of a particular part of your screen. So if you want to just get, if it's on Twitter and you just want to get the one tweet that they made or what have you, if you got a Mac, it's Command, Shift, 4, and you can take a screenshot and do all that. You can, I think for Mac, it does. I know it has a default where you can record too. So if it's a video or something you want to do, you can record it too.
And you can also download a program called Picasa, which is good for organizing photos on your computer. You can edit in it too, but if you have Picasa running while you're surfing the web, all you have to do is push whichever buttons on your keyboard work for screen capping, and it instantly will capture it in Picasa, so you don't have to, go paste it into like Paint Shop or something else if you're on a PC. So that's useful as well. But what I make sure I do when I'm screen capping things off of Facebook, I hover over the user's name with my mouse, and what that does, instead of you just seeing the small little thumbnail of their picture, because it might not always be clear that they're a white person or what they look like, it makes the timeline and the profile picture enlarge above it so you can see it. And I make sure I screen cap that with the comment, and then maybe do another screen cap of the comment itself, so it's very clear who is speaking, that it is a white person. See, the reason I figured to do this is because I ran into a website that I suspect is run by a white person who, for their particular area, is supposedly running a blog on crime or criminals in their area, and they seem to take great delight in screen capping images from black people's Facebook profiles of them holding guns and, anything they can use to belittle and make the black person look bad, and some things we do to make ourselves look bad, but they make sure they capture it and capitalize off of that. So I figure I'll do the same thing since I'm seeing all these white people acting up and showing their behinds.
Yeah, I think Mr. Nero, he was saying like the ammunition folder. I think that's a great one where I know to black male, he has a YouTube channel. I'm just not saying the name because it has some profanity in it.
F Hollywood?
Yes, thank you. He did a lot of screen captures when the Hunger Games came out this spring, and white people were going off about they were upset because Rue is a black person and they got other black and non-white characters in the movie, and he captured a lot of their tweets and different things that they were saying online and just made it a big video. Great evidence. You got confused victims. This racism is old and we don't have that anymore. Bam, you bust that out, show that. You can get some of it just with the election. There should be tons of footage. The riots at Mississippi, they got video footage of that. They got photographs of that. I'm trying to think. I know they got tons. I've seen tons of the Twitter captures and all that. Great way to get some confused people to rethink the world in which we live and whether or not these white people are as nice and friendly as they have been cracked up to be. Any final comments, anything anyone want to get in before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I wanted to say, just to piggyback on what Mr. Scotty Reed was saying about the media and all of this overt call for revolution and everything. NBC has a new show out that came out this season called Revolution. And I have not seen a full episode. I've seen a couple of minutes of one, but it appears that there's this black guy who's in charge, and he's terrorizing white people. So I'm sure that of course, was deliberately done, and it's sending out that clarion call. We are revolting, and I'm like, revolting against what? You run everything, but again, they have to, in order to enact their next step and to appear innocent, they have to fabricate and manufacture that they are being put upon and taken over by these melanin people.
I also notice with them crying that they're victims now, what I'm seeing on TV, it keeps getting whiter and whiter and whiter. Every new show that comes out, it's predominantly white. There may be one or two token black people in it, but the shows are getting whiter and whiter. I don't see a lot of television shows, not on main network television. I don't see a lot of shows with black and non-white people, unless they're playing homosexuals or something like that. But I do notice the media is getting whiter and whiter while they're still claiming to be the victims.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the music industry.
Same old, same old.
If it works, why change? I think that is their motto. I think Revolution might be coming on today. I haven't seen it, but Bruce Fine, she let me know it was on last week. While it was on, she let me know to watch. There were some interesting images on the program. I haven't seen a full episode either, so I can't comment. But I think the premise is somehow the electricity is out. There's been a global blackout.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got these groups of people, they're scavenging and trying to get the electricity back on and all that. That's about as much as I know about it. But even that right there, that you've had some sort of great apocalyptic event while you've got the president in the White House, I think that is no coincidence. While you've got all the white people calling for revolution, I don't think that's coincidence at all. And I think the white brain computer is going to process that in a manner. See, this is what could happen. President Obama, This is where we're going. Everything is just going to be all messed up, and it'll be all his fault. Black out.
Mm-hmm.
We will. I think that does come on Mondays. I think it's today. If you all got free time on the plantation and you want to invest 30 minutes and check out Revolution to see what. Not that I encourage the television thing. Reading is more important than watching television, but I do think it comes on Mondays. I think at 10. So if you want to check that out. Anywho,
you can probably find back episodes on Hulu.
Correct. Oh yeah, it's definitely online if you're interested. I think this is the first season, so I don't know how far they are into the whole plot and everything, but it's definitely, I'm sure, online if you wanna get caught up before it comes on this evening.
And this, I just want to say this last thing. I'm sorry, and it comes on at 10, I think, so that when white people lie down, that'll be the last thing that's on their mind as they dream of getting back to the way that it used to be.
Absolutely. I even I don't watch Saturday Night Live, but maybe I should. Saturday Night Live has had a lot of just explicitly racist skits this year. I played a couple of them in the sound clips. They had the one back in April when the Trayvon Martin situation was big news. They had a skit where they were just, in my view, it was just really trifling, making fun of all that. And they had Kanye West and Kim Kardashian in the skit talking about Trayvon Martin. They had a lot around the election issues. And the one that they had this past week, they had to begin, they had Mitt Romney out on his balcony, and he was all sulking and mad because he had lost the election, and they were making fun. They were like, "Oh, Donald Trump is inside and he's being racist," and the crowd all clapped. I said, "There's another one. They're labeling white people as racist." Just real, and white people are losing. We're losing. Things aren't going our way. Non-white people are taking over. We're victims. More and more of that mindset. I think you're going to see more and more images along those lines of white people are losing, black people, non-white people are taking over. We're losing.
And it's the white power structure who's putting that narrative out there. It's white people agitating white people. Manufacturing and fabricating, they're setting this whole thing up. This mindset, this fear, is white people putting that fear in the hearts and minds of quote unquote lower level, low information white people. It's Bill Maher coming out and making fun, and all these white women coming out making fun of white males, and that's their slick way of agitating white the more emotional, less sophisticated white people to go out and do something.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. Be more to discuss on this as we go. As I said, we'll be on Wednesday evening. Pam might be with us. We'll have to see. But we'll be here regardless. Wednesday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. If it's me, Gus T Renegade, one thing, if you want to check out, while I was on vacation, I said I had the opportunity to watch a lot of television that I normally don't watch. One thing that I saw while I was on vacation, history. What is it? I'm trying to make sure I give out the accurate title. So if you want to check it out, it's How Playboy Changed the World. Documentary film. How Playboy Changed the World. I saw it on the History Channel. I'm sure it's available online. I haven't looked, but I'm pretty sure it's online. If it was on the History Channel, you might even be able to get it from your local library. If you have the History Channel, I'm sure you can just check the schedule and see when it's going to come on again. But it was fascinating. And the thing that really stood out, I forgot what I was watching before I was kind of clicking around, channel surfing to see that was on. But I was watching something that was dealing with racism. And so I'm clicking around, and it's History of the Playboy channel. And so I'm watching, and I think I was on it for maybe 5 minutes, and racism comes up. Middle of the history of the Playboy, How Playboy Changed the World. Racism comes up. And they stay on it. So, I've watched about 30 minutes of this documentary on Playboy, and they're just talking about racism. And I'm like, wow, that the context of the world in which we live is saturated with racism, white supremacy. It was fascinating. I will share more on it. I'll just have to talk about that later. But yeah, you should check that out. Anybody out there, it will get real explicit about racism. If you know anybody, if you know any non-white people and they're into Playboy, and you think that they might be down to watch a documentary on that, confused about what they're going to see, pop that in. You will get a good 30 minutes of them just talking about racism, mistreatment of black people. We will be back, as I said, Wednesday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Great to hear from everybody. I'm glad everyone was able to call in. I think a lot of people had the day off, so they had some time to hang out. Good to hear from everyone. See, you can invest in the cows. The website, racism-notes.blogspot.com. racism-notes.blogspot.com. I'm hopefully going to take, since I have a day off, to write about Mike Brown being fired from the Lakers. Lots of racism, white supremacy there. I read an article where they were talking to LeBron James, Mike Brown, the black male who was fired. He used to coach LeBron James when he was in Cleveland, and they asked James how he felt or what he thought about the firing, and he said, I don't think Mike Brown was treated fairly. And then he went on, he said, I have so many things that I want to say, but I can't comment. And if you look at that article, it looks like you have to read between the lines. It looks like Mr. James is less confused. In fact, I would say it to me suggests that he thinks there might be some racism, white supremacy in play as to why this black male was fired. They were only 5 games into the season. Very unusual for a head coach to be fired 5 games into an 82-game season. It's a week. The season is like a week, 2 weeks old. Lots of racism all around it. I want to say something about that, so you can just kind of stay tuned to the blog to see when that updates. Justice's blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com. justdojustice.today.com. Let's see, other folks mentioned on the program, they were talking about constructive information on Cree's site, although I think they were talking about her Facebook page, but her blog is cre7.wordpress.com. Again, cre7.wordpress.com. And deactivate the white chip. Deactivate the white chip. Excellent website. I'm pulling that up as we speak. So I can give out dwcproject.com. dwcproject.com. Deactivate the white chip. They were guests on the program last September. Alrighty. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the program. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Please aid us, all non-white people, in getting a much better understanding of the problem. White people understanding who they are and how they function worldwide. They are enemies to black, non-white, highly melanated humans worldwide, forever. No change. Not going to desist with the practice of white supremacy. It's who they are. As he said, in the DNA. I think he even made that comment. It is in their DNA to practice racism, white supremacy. I think the quicker that we can accept that and move towards what do we need to do to neutralize them, we can get this problem solved. Good to hear from Sister Delisha as well. We'll be back on Wednesday evening. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. C.O.W.S signing out.
White people have a very, very serious problem.